Hello, welcome to Child Development 195, Chapter 6, Coaching to Connect Curriculum, Assessment, and Teaching. In this chapter, we're going to really focus on the curriculum process for teachers, not necessarily in the sense of how teachers, actual specific activities, but what we're looking at here is we're going to look at how observation plays a role in this process, to reflect on the documentation, the observation that we've done, plan curriculum then, apply teaching strategies, and then evaluate the process before we, of course, start all over again. And that's something that we're going to be covering. In addition, meeting the expectations of current early childhood state, national, and professional standards requires that teachers of our youngest children are able to identify what a child knows and is able to do, and how that knowledge translates into plans, teaching strategies to continue the child's learning. A teacher needing support to make curriculum, assessment, and teaching connections benefit from a coach or a mentor who models and understands these connections. So you have to be able to understand these before you can expect the teacher to understand these. Coaching is something that we're going to be talking about in this chapter quite a bit. Coaching for understanding how to link child outcomes to any teaching and planning strategy is urgently needed by many early childhood teachers today. No ifs, ands, or buts about that. And so in this chapter, we're really going to focus on these components of the process. All right. Introduction. As you know, I'm things fall and slip and everything else. I hit my glasses over there. So, all right. So this chapter focuses again on the mentor helping teachers in curriculum development, assessment of children, and making connections between theory and practice to actually implement those activities in the classroom. We're linking curriculum assessment and teaching as mentors. And mentors must model and demonstrate how all these work together. So you have to be able to, as a mentor, understand and know this process before you can, of course, expect somebody else to learn from you in this. And a couple things we're going to talk about in this chapter quite a bit are some of the courses that can help you in this process that we have in the Child Development Department, as well as, of course, other colleges that would have similar classes. So coaching is talked about quite a bit in the chapter. Coaching is a person with specific expertise. So we think of, a football coach or a softball coach or a basketball coach, or, of course, in all the sports, we think of coaches left and right, and they have they've had some experience with this. They've done this. They've had years of knowing how to work with people and to get them to have the results that they want to have. So in our field, a coach is someone like you, a mentor, who is able to then give your expertise in these areas of young children to a mentor. The chapter states that the specific role of a coach is to build capacity for specific professional dispositions, skills, and behaviors, and is focused on goal setting and achievement for an individual or a group. So mainly we talk about in here the process of mentoring just an individual teacher, but there could very well be times in which you're mentoring a group. And as you noticed, if you hopefully you've read the chapter and all, but reading the chapter, you'll notice that towards the end of the chapter, there's information on some processes we can do with some small groups and so forth. So I'm sure that you have probably come across a cynical person in your life, somebody who doesn't necessarily have the best, most positive attitude. But we definitely have cynical teachers in our field as well. And these are people who tend to bring about a lot of negativity, or like if something needs to be changed, oh no, we can't do that. No, that can't be done. Why do we have to do that? Those kinds of things. I know I've come across many in my day of, whether it be students coming up through our program or, aides, assistants that we've had working for us, and occasionally over the years, an actual teacher. Luckily right now at the lab schools, We don't have any cynical teachers, so I'm really happy about that. We've done a really good job hiring um, over the last, last decade or so. So we don't have any cynical teachers, but I've come across them in my day. I've worked with them as co-teachers as well. So we want people who are positive, and as a coach, hopefully you can bring about that positivity in someone versus somebody who might be a little bit more cynical. You have that ability again to turn somebody who might have more negativity into somebody with a more positive outlook, and that's what we're looking for. We do, this field is hard enough. We don't need to have people that are negative all the time because then it just drags everybody down. Um, it's kind of it's kind of like the bad apple, and then you get one piece of rotten something, and then it starts to affect everything else within that area. So we don't want that. We definitely don't want that in our field. With coaching, we of course only want to have those positive people in the field, which I just said. Teachers must be able to defend their curriculum choices in the classroom with a coach. This is more likely to happen. So, for instance, I know there was some good discussion lately in my 152 class, and there usually is every single semester that I teach that class with the article. There's a calendar article, and so there are some sites out there that make sure, that requires teachers to have a calendar up on the board. Well, the article that I share with students is an article that basically says, there are different ways in which you can expose children to things that are more developmentally appropriate when it comes to the concept of time. So, if you've ever talked to a child with time, they'll say, "Oh, that happened to me yesterday," or "Tomorrow I'm going to Disneyland." They don't understand that concept of time yet. So, having a calendar up there is not necessarily something um, that is developmentally appropriate. Then you'll have the teachers who say, or the administrators who say, well, they're learning about number. Well, we can learn about number in so many other ways. We don't need to have a calendar up on the wall to learn about number. So it's a great article. It brings about a lot of, usually really great discussion because there's always some that are like, oh yeah, now I totally get it. I understand the article, and I'm not going to do calendars anymore. I'm going to bring this up with my administrators and so forth, my directors, and see if we can make some changes. And then you have the other ones that, no, I think we should do the calendar, and I fully still believe in it. And they're really not understanding that whole developmental process with the child. So, with that being said, sometimes teachers have to defend their curriculum choices. So, this is a way if you've got a coach, that's somebody who can support you in this process. So, I tend to be one, well, bring that up with your director. And, well, they don't want to hear it. Well, maybe it's the way in which you need to bring it up. So, having a mentor there to support you in this process is an incredible benefit for teachers. And then, really quick, the fad curriculums. So, when we're talking about fad curriculums, that there's things that are going to come and things that are going to go. So, for instance, the outdoor classroom right now is a big thing. Loose parts is another big thing. Um, over the course of time, we've had Reggio and emergent curriculum. Those are not necessarily fad curriculums per se, but they're things that we would want to incorporate into the class. But some teachers get hooked into, oh, this is the only way that we can do it. For instance, like something like Reggio. Reggio works really well in Reggio Emilia in Italy because it has fostered there. It began there. Its roots are there, and it has grown there. And they have a whole bunch of community support. Here in the United States, especially here in Southern California, we don't necessarily have that great sense of community and that great sense of parents buying in and feeding into supporting a classroom or supporting a center and so forth. So not to say that Reggio is a fad, but it is something that we can attempt to do, but we're not going to get the same exact results that Reggio Emilia gets in Italy. So things will come, things will go. I can think of the one that's probably the most outstanding to me in all my years of teaching is the whole language. So let's talk about whole language real quick. So whole language was that children will develop, language and literacy skills by 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 thinking of the whole process of language. And at that point in time, they pretty much threw phonics out of out of it. So sounding out a word, you know, like the word fad, add, fad, instead of looking at it, they would look at it with chunks, like, oh, that you have to know that FAD is fad, looking at the whole word, not sounding it out. And then that's when things like some of you might have definitely been children or might have even not been born at this time, but things came out on TV and everything to support, hooked on phonics. You might have heard of that term because schools weren't doing phonics anymore. They were doing this whole language type of curriculum, and children weren't learning how to read, and children weren't understanding it. And parents knew, and some teachers also knew that they still need phonics to sound out words. So a combination of whole language in addition to phonics is something that's definitely more appropriate. So we don't want to necessarily go from one extreme to the other. It's not just phonics, but it's not just whole language. We need a combination of the two. So something like that is a good example of a fad curriculum. Also resist the make and take types of curriculum, which we have a lot out there today. So for instance, I warn my students about this a lot, and I'm going to warn you too. Pinterest, ton of great ideas. So lots of great ideas, but you have to be very, very careful because I would say a larger majority of the ideas on there are things like, are the quote unquote cutesy types of things that, might look really cute for parents, but might not be developmentally appropriate. There might be too many steps, too many processes. And then, of course, you get more teacher-directed types of activities versus child-initiated child processes and so forth, where they're just able to have that open-endedness. So many Pinterest activities are closed-ended. So sharing activity ideas with teachers is a good thing, but also being aware of what the appropriateness of it is. So for instance, when I teach the student teaching class, students have to get approval, activity ideas approved by me before they take them to the teacher to get approved. And because I'm kind of like that first layer, and there's many times students will come up to me and have this, they're all excited about this idea, and I'm like, okay, well, let's talk about this. Where's the open-endedness on this? If it takes you longer to prep the activity, then it's probably much more teacher-directed than it is child-initiated, and and has an open-endedness and a creative side to it. So be aware of that. So that's something that you can pass on to your teachers as well. Coaches should begin dialogue to see what the teacher already knows about curriculum and what the teacher knows about children in his or her group. So that's important because we're going to start talking about the documentation process and the observation process here. So what do they already know? And some teachers who have been in the field for a while might know quite a bit more. But if you're talking about a brand spanking new young teacher who just has 12 or 18 units, something like that, under their belt of college education, they might not have enough to know really exactly and kind of be really struggling like, I don't know, I'm not too sure. Observation is that first step to curriculum planning, and not all young teachers especially understand the importance of observation in the planning process. So we want to make sure that, and especially if somebody has not had coursework and so forth in observation, most of the time, most of the growth and development courses, for instance, our Child Development 100 at Palomar, have some type of observation in there. But until you get into more of the classes like the Child Development 105, which is actually the observation and assessment course, which we'll touch upon again here in a few minutes, students and young teachers don't really understand the importance of the observation process. So you might need to be the first time to show them this process. Ask the teacher to recall a time when he or she has been effective in teaching a child. So if we do this, then we're going to hopefully be able to draw out of them, something that they might be having a difficult time with. So if they think about something that they've had a really good experience with, then we can try to work on the things that they might be struggling with. So we want to, everybody's had an effective time teaching a child. So even if it's just, um, sitting down and reading a book to a child, we all know that that's a very important process. But it's one of those things that, if the child asks a few questions to a young teacher, they might be going, oh, wow, yeah, they asked questions and everything. So I know that they were interested in da 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 da, whatever it might be, okay? So it can be some time to take to draw that out because it might be something very simple, just like even reading a book. Um, so try to maybe ask some additional questions and so forth if they're having that difficult time coming out from their past experiences. Oh, sorry. There's a three-box strategy that the textbook goes into. It's an um, observation, curriculum, and teaching. So have the teachers write down what have they observed about children, even if it's just something really basic. I observed a child going over to the book area and picking out a book and looking at it. Maybe I need to bring in different types of books in my classroom. I have to rotate them, or maybe nobody's been over at the book area. Let's go that way with it, right? Nobody's been over at the book area lately. Well, what type of books do you have over there? So that might be part of the curriculum, having additional books in areas that you might see some child interest in. Or what books were they interested in the last time you put out new books? Because we know that things have to be rotated in a classroom every teaching. Oh, yes, going to read to a child if you see them interested in picking out a book, that might be an opportunity for you to go over and to actually read to them. So this is actually a really good strategy. So I would suggest, adopting this in your process of what's the sorry, of mentoring a teacher and so forth. Okay. Um, oh, I think my thing just, yeah, there we go. There's multiple purposes of assessment. For one, you want to make sure that you document what the child knows and where they're at developmentally. You have to see if there's any needs that need to be addressed. So you might have some red flags that you've kind of seen. Again, even if you just see it, you're observing. That's an observation. You might not have documented it yet. You might not have written it down, but you are observing. So sometimes we have a child that maybe, we keep saying, what did you say? Or I can't hear you. Or, can you say that again? Or what? And maybe that child has a speech or language delay. So if we notice ourselves doing that over and over again, and maybe the child getting frustrated and things like that, there could very well be some needs that need to be addressed. So that could then, if we have that documentation, oh my gosh, it's so valuable because then we can, pass it on to maybe our administrators who can help us work with the parents. Depends again how young the teacher is, how new they are to the field, and then get that additional help for the child. We also need assessment for curriculum planning. What do the children know? Where are they at developmentally? What are they interested in? What types of questions have they been asking in order for us to plan appropriate curriculum? We should not have any canned curriculum. I know there's a lot of centers out there that do canned curriculum in the sense of, here's the curriculum book for the year, and on week 5, or week 4 in September, week 4, or October, week 1, or whatever it might be, um, you need to now, do this activity and this activity. And that doesn't give any, it's not individualizing for the children in the classroom that you're working in. So curriculum planning, hopefully you've got open-ended ways to plan curriculum. Program evaluation, so for instance, doing things like the desired results if you're in a state-funded program, so the DRDPs in the state of California. Once those DRDPs are done, then we of course, I'm going to click on the next one, we use them for parent-teacher conferences, but we also use them for program evaluation. So what are things that we need to do in our program in order to promote children's learning? Or maybe we see, wow, there's a lot of children that seem that they are lacking some of these skills. What do we need to do in the classroom? Maybe there's more supplies we need to purchase. Maybe there's some different activities we need to do. Maybe we need to bring in a guest speaker to speak on this topic. Maybe teachers need to go out for some training and so forth. So if young teachers, if teachers need to know this purpose of assessment because it's so important, but many times they don't necessarily get that. There are types and methods of assessment, and we are using naturalistic, authentic, curriculum-based assessment in our field. In other words, you know, there's that authentic assessment, and there's the formal assessment, the testing assessment, and we're not testing young children, so we're providing naturalistic, authentic assessment. So that means it's done in the classroom in the child's natural setting. Of course, parents can also observe at home in their natural setting, but when we're in the classroom and so forth, whether it be inside or outside, but we're observing in the child's natural setting. We're not testing the child, we're not taking them to another room and we have a whole list of questions to ask them or experiments to do with them. And we're going to do this mainly, ideally the best method out there is anecdotals. So teachers need to learn how to write anecdotals. So if you're working with someone who has not, for instance, had an observation course, you might need to bring some of these things out with them and talk to them about it. And hopefully you have enough experience in it to then teach and to work with, to mentor the teacher. Checklists, which the desired results, for instance, is kind of a combination of it. It's a checklist and a rating scale. Yes, they can do this, but at what level can they do it at? So it's a little bit more into a rating scale, but a checklist, whether yes or no, they've got these skills. Sometimes we create checklists before we go on to the desired results. So frequency counts is another one. It's a great one. So I really like frequency counts for things the children might be doing or might not be doing. So for instance, a child, you know, biting. You know, if we're working with 2-year-olds or, you know, 1, 2, 3-year-olds, there's probably going to be some type of biting experience, biting that happens in the classroom that's developmentally appropriate. Even though it's an atypical behavior, it still is developmentally appropriate at that level. So that might be something that you're counting, like how many times a day, and hopefully it's not more than once or twice, but or how many times in a week did a child bite. Other frequency counts can be done for maybe the child who usually doesn't speak much in the classroom, but it goes over and makes those social connections or talking to a teacher or another child. Photos can also be used, of course, and then a variety of different types of tools. So there's lots of different methods we can use, and I would highly suggest, again, taking an observation course to go over those. We've also got multiple contexts, so where do we gather the information? Again, we can gather it mainly, hopefully, from the classroom, but we could also, like I said, the parents could have documentation if the child's receiving services from outside, you know, from like speech and language or so forth, then we could, you know, hopefully we have permission all to share information together. We've been maybe in some IEP meetings or IFSP meetings. Multiple sources, who do we get the documentation from? And again, that can be from those same sources that I talked about. It could be even be from doctor's reports, but mainly from teacher classroom observations, parent observations, which again, some parents we have to be aware of that, you know, a lot of parents, most parents think that their child is perfect. So, you know, and also remember a child's behavior in a home setting versus a classroom setting can be completely different because at home, maybe they don't have any other children to interact with versus a classroom where they have a lot of other children to interact with. And then any specialists and counselors possibly as well could be included in that group. Then we've got the some of the common pitfalls. So culture and language, have we taken those into consideration? If the child is, you know, for instance, if a child has just recently immigrated to 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 the United States, to your classroom or to your area and so forth, can and has been introduced in your classroom, you know, coming into a classroom could be completely different than what they've been used to, or they've just never experienced anything like this before. We can be kind of pretty overwhelming for a lot of cultures, so be aware of that, as well as language. You know, if you are not familiar with the language, getting a translator is extremely important. But if you're not able to understand the child, I know I worked in a classroom, my first teaching experience. 7 of my 15 children were Hmong, and it's a a group of people from the Laos and Vietnam area, and they so I had one little girl who was extremely bilingual, but the other, and another one who was somewhat bilingual. The other children had hardly any language whatsoever in English, and so there were points in time where I didn't want to, but I didn't know one word among, and I had a really hard time just even learning the language, even some just basic, I kind of learned, bathroom, sit, stand, come, go. Some of those words that you wouldn't want to necessarily use because you're not using it in a context, but until they can grasp a little bit more of the language. So being aware of that, um, with our observation process, as well as special needs. So if a child has special needs, then we're going to probably be having some documentation in different areas. And then we have to really be careful of our biases or our assumptions, and we're going to get into some interpretation here shortly. But you you need to know and understand that you will um, you could very well have favorites at points in time. So favorite children, and you have to be completely and totally aware of that. Almost every single teacher has favorites, and has those other children that just are very difficult to work with and a struggle for you each and every day to get up and go to work sometimes. But don't make an assumption, just because the child might be the extremely active child and running all around the classroom and everything doesn't mean that there are times in which they can focus. Because I'm going to guarantee if you do some observation, you'll find some areas in which they are really focused on. So if we can bring those out more in the classroom, then we're, aha, I found something, right? And it interests the child and keeps them on task more. So be extremely aware of your biases, your assumptions that you might have about children or families, because that can be a huge pitfall. And we'll continue talking about that here in a couple minutes. Instructional assessment instruments and program evaluation tools and resources. There's several that are listed in your book, so check them out. And I know I'm going to be providing some additional resources for that in the module for this section. Okay. All right. As I said before, Child Development 105 or another type of observation course is highly recommended to all in the field. So hopefully you've already completed an observation course. If not, you need to as soon as possible, and because you have to understand this importance of observing a child. Importance when we're doing observations, record only what you see. So this is a way to help us prevent those biases. Gather the facts. Think of yourself as a video camera, not necessarily use a video camera, but think of yourself as a video camera. And your opinions, your interpretations, your impressions are to be completely avoided when you're only doing the observation. So there's another time for that. Excuse me. There's another time for that, but not during the actual observation process. So you want the facts, only the facts, and nothing but the facts. Some phrases and words and phrases to avoid when you're recording observations. So during the actual observation process, be sure not to use these. He seems, he is trying, he appears, he wants, I think, I feel, he understands. You don't know what the child is thinking in their head. That's your interpretation of it. So these things should not be used when you're actually recording the specific observation. So, write these down. I would say probably the it seems, I think, I believe, I feel. These ones here are probably the ones, it appears or he appears. These are the things that don't really they don't describe the behavior, because they're part of your opinion and they're part of your impression and your interpretation, which you're going to have separate from your actual observation. Okay? Things that you want to make sure that you include the child's own words, so use quotation marks to document what the child says. Write it exactly as the child or the adult says it. And if you don't understand something, you could put in parentheses, don't understand, that kind of thing. But write it exactly as they said. Be positive. So we want to make sure, even if the behavior is negative, state what occurred exactly as it occurred without opinion or judgment. So Um, you know, we would want to, for instance, if a child is, comes up and hits another child because they're on the bike, the first child, the hitter comes up because they were riding the bike first, but the other child comes up. So, Johnny was riding the bike. Susie all of a sudden gets on the bike. Johnny comes over and hits Susie because she's on his bike, is what he's thinking in his head, right? So describe exactly what happened, not that, he thinks it was his bike. We wouldn't want that. That's our interpretation, okay? Exactly how it is. So, we would describe exactly how the child hit and so forth. But again, we have no judgment or opinion in our actual observation. Um, then we want to be specific, so give details. So it's better to say William counts 1, 2, 5, 6, 8, 10, instead of saying William tries to count to 10. Again, we got that word tries in there. So it's not specific. It doesn't give us exactly what he did or what he's able to do. So we want to make sure that we are being very specific with our observations. And then know what's important and what you're recording. So, if the first time a child rides a two-wheeler bike, that's something really important, right? It's like, wow, or, the first couple times when maybe they attempt to ride the two-wheeler bike, they're trying to get their balance on it. Maybe they try it for 10 or 15 minutes and put it down. Then the next day or maybe a couple days later, they come back to it and they try again and they're getting a little bit more balance. And then maybe the third day, by the time, with a little bit more adult guidance and support, they're able to actually ride it, and then they start riding around the bike path or whatever it might be on that two-wheeler. So it's important to note what it is that you're recording. That's important. But then once the child, once Susie gets the hang of riding a two-wheeler bike, we don't necessarily need to record that every time. So that building up to it, that's important to record. There might be one follow-up one where Susie um, rides around the bike path on the two-wheeler 10 times without stopping. That's kind of like our end. Last one, we don't really need to focus on her ability to ride a two-wheeler again. Okay? Once you observe a child, then you must interpret what you've seen, of course. So we want to make sure that know that it's impossible to be completely objective in this process. So, I do my best to try to be as objective as possible to see all sides to it. Occasionally, as being a coordinator and so forth over the years, there's times in which difficult decisions have to be made. But knowing that I've looked at all sides of the story before, all sides of the problem before, or if somebody else brings something up to me, oh yeah, I haven't thought of that. I'm more than willing to admit that. Oh yeah, I'm always willing to take in more feedback before a decision is made. But when you're talking about gathering that documentation for a child, we want to make sure that we're as objective as possible, okay? Now, again, we're not going to be completely objective, but try to be as objective as possible. We also have our own filters that we see the world through. So my background, my experiences, my growing up with my family and so forth has created certain filters for me. So, like for instance, one of the ones I give in class and stuff is, I come from a rather loud family. We talk loud. We don't yell at each other because yelling there's always some type of negativity with that. But there's points in time where we might be talking rather loud. I talk loud in classes. When we're talking or discussing things in the classroom. So when I get home, I have to know that sometimes it's okay to lower my voice a little bit. Like right now, if somebody was home, somebody was sitting at home with me, they'd probably say, "Mom, you're talking a little loud." I know. So I know that. I know that. But some of those things come through our own filters. So I might not be as stressed about a child talking loud in a classroom, or it might not bother me as much because I've been used to it. But we also know that there's some families that are very calm and very collected and talk in a very, quiet type of manner. And so those teachers coming into the field might go, oh my gosh, there's so much activity going on in here. It's same kind of thing, an only child versus a child who, you know, grows up in a household with 6 or 7 siblings. Completely different experiences with that. So we have our own filters. But again, we want to try to be as objective as possible. Interpretation and evaluation are the most dangerous part of the process because this is where you can put labels on. And I can observe a child, but I should never put a label on a child, okay? Um, so, for instance, if I think a child might have a speech and language delay, I'm going to gather that documentation. I'm going to ask the parents, have you heard this, or do you sometimes have a difficult time understanding Susie? And that's when we say, oh, it might be a good idea to, to get some further evaluation, documentation and evaluation and assessment from a speech therapist or speech pathologist. So they can make that determination as to whether maybe there might be some services out there that could help Susie in with her speech and language. So I'm not going to label the child as a child who has special needs or a child who has speech and language delays, even though I might think that, I might feel that, but to be objective as possible, I'm not going to state that, I'm not going to label it. I'm going to let another professional who has more experience in that field in speech and language make that determination. So I'm going to observe it, I'm going to record the facts and only the facts, and I'm not going to put a label on it, okay? You need to get feedback from others during this experience to make sure you're on the right track, especially for those young teachers who are, who are just learning this process and so forth. That we want to, if they haven't not had observation courses or things along those lines, we want to make sure that they are given that experience, that when they do this observation, that you're able to give them some feedback on that. Biases that prevent from getting to know a child again. The book talks about videotaping for observation purposes. That gives us a rather two-dimensional view of it. It doesn't take into consideration the entire situation in the classroom and so forth. So you have to be very careful when you're using observation. You have to know how to do observation in a real life situation before you look at something that would be videotaped. You need multiple sources of a documentation. So again, things from the parents, things from the teachers, things from maybe outside sources like doctors or counselors or some other sources there, as well as different methods. So, checklists, rating scales, frequency counts, anecdotals, which are your tried and true best one. Okay, so best way of observing. The observation process is a continuous cycle, so it never stops. Even though teachers, for instance, for DRDPs, you're going to rate a child after 60 days in your program, then after 6 months in the program, and then it continues, every 6 months after that. But it's important to know that it's a continuous process, so you're never stopping the observation. Okay, the observations. You're using observations on a daily and weekly basis. There's also, you have to be aware of some culture in the observation process. So what is culturally appropriate for some children versus other children. And then we want to make sure that we are reliable, that we have reliability, that we have validity. So those two things can come from the different types of tools and so forth that we're using in this process. So that also is your experience in the process, the mentees, the teachers' experience in the process, to make sure that they have that you're giving that feedback in order for them to gain more reliability and more validity. And then, of course, we want to make sure that everything has permission and that we keep confidentiality in the process. So all those things, again, are extremely important in this process. Okay? Putting it all together, so no matter how busy a teacher is, there must be time for observations. I know of a few teachers that really do a great job on observations, and a few teachers that really struggle with observations because of time management situations. So, and I know over the years we've had some teachers that have almost refused to do observations altogether. They're no longer with us, but it was something that was a struggle and something that we had to continually focus on with the teacher, especially with one teacher. Mentors need to get teachers to realize the importance of observation. Does the teacher have the knowledge, skills, and resources for interpretation of the notes or evidence? So they might not. Again, if you don't have some of those basic theories and knowledge of where children are developmentally, it's going to be a lot more difficult to make interpretation of your notes and evidence. Reflection, asking questions to interpret the evidence. So can they look back on it and go, oh yes, this is working, or no, this is not working, or how did this work in this situation, and what are the next steps I need to take? And then, of course, we need to plan a response to the information. So once we get this interpretation, how are we going to make our changes for next time around? So again, cyclical process for observing, observation, observe it, we want to record it, then we have to evaluate it, and then we have to plan. So that continual cycle. Mentors must have this knowledge prior to coach a teacher in these areas. So you as the mentor, again, like I said, you have to have these skills and abilities. If you don't, this might be something that you need to practice on before you actually become a mentor teacher out in the field. And some reflection. So if we accept the notion that as human beings we're unable to truly be objective, how can we work with a teacher and increase his or her attitude of openness? So good thing to think about. Think about that for a while, but hopefully we can just get people to maybe see things from other sides, maybe give some different ideas into that, and then hopefully that can bring about just a little bit of openness. And sometimes even if we just crack the door a little bit, that door will start to swing open, and that's what we want. We want openness in our field. And then we've got reflection, making meaning, and use of professional resources. So once the teacher learns how to observe, then interpretation of the findings must happen, of course. New teachers must seek out help from more experienced teachers to assist with this process because they're not going to know it right offhand. When we're facilitating these teacher meetings, we must set some ground rules. So for instance, no criticism or judgment of people is allowed. So when we're talking about, maybe we're doing this in a small group setting or maybe 2 or 3 people, know that just because something is said, it doesn't necessarily mean, some people take everything as a criticism or a judgment, and it might just be a comment. And so we want only ideas and solutions, and we want people to be open to those ideas and solutions, not thinking of it as a criticism or a judgment. A criticism, you handled that totally horrible, or, why is that child doing that in your classroom? That's a criticism. That could be a judgment. Why does so-and-so always hit in your classroom? We want the ideas and solutions, not those criticisms and judgments. We want to listen to and extend other people's ideas. So I know that when it comes to ideas, and if we really start thinking of things, I know when we were in a meeting the other day, it was a dean level meeting, and all the directors and chairs and so forth were there, and there was a couple things that came out, and one person said this and another person said that, and I added to it and so forth. So but as we were listening to it, I was like, ooh, that could happen, or that could happen, and extending on some other people's ideas. And so in that process, there were several of us who were able to give the dean some really good feedback, for instance, on ways of promoting the college and so forth. So something just as simple as that. Ask questions to clarify what is shared. There's many times I don't understand everything, and I'm like, oh, what? So I'm one of the first ones to have my hand up in meetings and all, and going, I don't understand that, or tell me more. I'm not understanding what you're saying. So I'm having a hard time understanding. And if we put it, of course, on us, it's not that we're saying that that person is not making themselves clear necessarily, but I'm not understanding what was being shared. And that power of group brainstorming is incredible. So anytime that we can brainstorm together, we can really see how it can be a positive thing in our, classroom and or center situation. So for instance, I know yesterday somebody came up with an idea at one of our staff meetings, and so we started brainstorming it. Well, how is this going to work? What are we going to do with that? How is that going to happen? We were listening to others, and then We made some different suggestions and taking everything into consideration. Is it too much for the parents? Is it too much for the teachers? What is our goal in getting, in doing this activity? And okay, so if we really have a goal of, doing one thing, then does everybody else need to be involved? Maybe, maybe not. So we had some really good discussion and some really good, powerful brainstorming just even yesterday at another meeting that I was in. Reflection, making meaning, and use of professional resources again is continued. So Reggio Inspired is where teachers want to definitely share documentation. They have a process called co-inquiry meetings, and this is where everyone listens and then has an equal chance to respond. Within that, we are sharing focused documentation, so questions and dilemmas. So I observed this about a child, and how do I deal with it? What should I have done? Or I observed this, and I did this, and I don't think it was the right thing to do. So we've got our questions, we've got our dilemmas. So we share that information. We have communication, so everybody gives feedback, offers interpretation to it, and then of course we have actions to take. So what are we going to do either this time or this next time, or if this happens again, what kind of actions will we take in that situation? So co-inquiry meetings, I think probably most of us do things along these lines in the field, hopefully, and hopefully you can learn from it. And if you don't do something like this, there's a couple other ones that we're going to be talking about here in a few minutes that might have, so this is one example, and there's going to be a couple others we're going to talk about that might have more meaning to you. So they're all kind of along the same track. Coaching reflection. So as a mentor coach, you too must observe the teacher, interpret behavior, and find ways to teach the teacher. In figure 6.4, there's coaching notes after each visit, and I think these are some really good things to jot down. So if you haven't, you should really jot these down, or make notes of it here on your notes. But needs and interests of the teacher. So what are the needs and interests of the teacher? What was the purpose of the visit? And the focus of inquiry or discussion. So what did we really discuss at that time, at that meeting? The strategies discussed. So okay, so if this was the concern or issue that was going on, what kind of strategies did we discuss to help solve that? Hopefully we've got some strengths and resources for the teacher. Oh, try this or try that, or check out this resource or check out this website. And then following, of course, the next steps in the timeline. So something like this is a really good thing to just note. I could see incorporating this. This would be something very easy to incorporate after each and every meeting that you have with a teacher. And it can also give you that next steps in the timeline for that. So it's kind of almost like a minutes of the meeting, we generally have even though an agenda might kind of be in our head for a meeting, this is kind of like the minutes of it. And this is a really good thing to have, so everybody knows what their job and responsibilities are for the next step, and then our timeline, when are we going to meet next. So if anything out of this chapter, besides the observation stuff, I would definitely write this part down. Okay. All right, or like I said, highlight in your book and everything. There's a appendix A in this chapter, in chapter 6. It starts on page 144. It's not a typical planning form. It's a process for the teacher to think about what they need to learn as well as what the child needs to learn. The form is a guide that you could use in the mentoring process, but I personally like the short planning form. It's at the bottom of page 148. I think the one there from 144 to 148, I think it's just a little too much. In all honesty, I don't think it's necessarily a realistic format. So if anything, focus on the bottom of page 148 where it says the alternate, the short planning form to connect goals, evidence, and learning experiences. It's a simplified form to use with teachers that are beginning to learn about planning. But again, I think you could probably use it in other situations as well. But at least start with that over the long form that they give you. And then there's also the NAYC's teacher preparation standards. So most likely in most cases and situations, if you're the mentor and you're looking at the teacher, what else can they do to maybe expand their knowledge of children? So, for instance, besides an observation course, maybe a course on child guidance, behavior guidance, positive child guidance, something along those lines would be a really good asset for the teacher and another great course to recommend. Maybe it's a health, safety, nutrition course. Again, depending on, maybe it's a curriculum class. So for instance, seeking out that additional education is almost always a good thing. I'll give some additional resources for those teacher preparation standards in the module. Okay. All right. The co-inquiry process, what we just talked about earlier from the Reggio experiences. There's also a professional learning communities, PLC. It's kind of limited for the mentor-teacher process, so I know a lot of school districts in K through 12. It's been applied a lot in K through 12 settings and so forth, but not as much in early childhood. But it's another thing. The next one they talk about, though, the other model that they talk about, which I do find some validity in, and I think it could be used, is critical friends. And this is a process that focuses on developing collegial relationships and encouraging reflection, which may include creating a more democratic style leadership. So this would probably be really great for directors to use or mentors to use at staff meetings and so forth, especially if people are not necessarily as open to certain ideas, or if a director is seen as more being an authoritarian versus a democratic type of style of leadership. Of course, some hard decisions have to be made again, but hopefully we can look at all sides to a situation. In the field, we always want everyone to get along. So sometimes we tend not to want to talk about difficult issues or avoid dilemmas. This process, though, is a way to both receive and give feedback to promote reflection. So if we do have some of those difficult situations, hopefully we can work our way through it and bring about those issues, because I know if things fester for a long period of time, there's generally a blowing up point, right? I mean, if you have a little cut or scratch or something and you don't take care of it on your leg, and all of a sudden it gets infected and everything, there's going to be some consequences to pay for that. Same thing is true if you have something at the site that might be difficult. Well, so and so never picks up their fair share of the workload or whatnot, or they never plan or set up the outside area, then that could be something that could fester for a long time, and then all of a sudden you have this blow up. So we don't want that. We want to talk about it in a civil way, and this critical friends process can be a way for that. So, oh, sorry, I can see my thing didn't work there. But it's suggested for small groups of 6 to 12 people. It works well for staff meetings, or if a mentor is coming in to give some guidance and direction and so forth to a group. That would also work well. And when a group is solving a problem, this works out really well. So there's 3 different roles. There's the facilitator, which sets the limits, goes over protocol, and keeps the group on track, so kind of sets the ground rules. So this one's kind of, the one policing the, the discussion. So you kind of have to have somebody who comes back to that. The presenter listens after presenting an issue and doesn't talk during feedback. So present something. So as a mentor, you might present something to the group, and then when everybody's giving feedback, the facilitator is taking care of that, not you, okay? So the presenter is not talking during the feedback. They might be writing things down to document, but not actually talking. So the facilitator would be doing that along with the participants, which gives feedback to the presenter. So the feedback can come in that whole that warm, supportive statements. It could also be cool, which offers other ways to think about issues and might raise some questions, or hard, which really expands on ideas or raises concerns. So hopefully we've got some balance there. Not everything can always be just warm and fuzzy. There's times in which it is appropriate to ask questions and answer questions and so forth. So this type of critical friends model can work really well, because sometimes you've got, if you don't have a facilitator who kind of sets the limits and goes over protocol, and sometimes the presenter can then become overwhelmed if everybody starts talking at once and so forth, then your whole process kind of breaks down. So this is this is a really valid way and method to use when we're trying to, when we have dilemmas, and then when we're trying to provide feedback. Some other possibility ways of sharing, it might not be too formal for most centers, and I can see my thing is not working again. Well, I don't know what's going on. I was having some problems with the PowerPoint, whatchamacallit, the animations to get things to come in, so I'm sorry. Sorry about that. But with this other possibility, let's get back to the talking stick method. It tends to be a simpler process. You do need a facilitator, and then there's some kind of object designated for a person. It's when that person's holding that object, they're the only one who can speak. So, whether it be some little decorated talking stick or a popsicle stick that has, something on it, or, it can be as simple as a pen. If you're holding the purple pen, you might have the talking stick at that point in time. So it's something that could be implemented very quickly and easily in a meeting. But I know I've been in many meetings where there's a lot of talk over, where everybody's talking at once, and then everybody's confused and they don't know which direction they're going in. So you have to have a facilitator to come back to it saying, okay, hold on. And then it might be a good time to implement the talking stick. Because this way that one person who's talking is the one who is, who's giving the feedback, promoting the dialogue and feedback without talking over someone else. Because I'm sure we've all been in places and meetings and so forth where we've had people with dominating personalities, and I can be one of those myself, I know. So with those dominating personalities who sometimes need to take a step back and really listen before, talking. I know several years ago, we had something that came up on campus where it was a really difficult situation, and we had a facilitator come in and set some ground rules and everything as the discussion ensued. But I think having a talking stick would have actually been a really good thing at that meeting. So in the future, it might be a way to, might be another technique to use. All right, evaluation and reflection. So as a mentor, where are you socially and emotionally to receive feedback? Are you a person who's open to that or not? Not everybody is. So you have to increase your comfort level of receiving feedback from teachers. Nobody, how do you react to the criticism? Nobody, people don't necessarily like to get criticism from another, but some people are definitely more open to it. And I know I can think back on a couple of student teachers who really struggled, who just had a really difficult time. I can think of a couple specific ones, and trying to get them through the process. And some were so open to feedback and suggestions, and just did what well, try this, and then, oh, I tried that, and I did it, and so open to the feedback. I could see their growth. It was just amazing how to see their growth. Others I've had have been completely and totally negative to criticism and saying, well, I know how to do this. I know what I'm doing, kind of a thing. It's my way or the highway, kind of a thing. And they didn't grow. So you, as a mentor, how do you react to criticism? I've been evaluated over the years. We get evaluated on a regular basis, and there's some times where, I've heard things like, oh, yeah. But I'm usually like, yeah, I already know that. Yeah, I know that's an area, that's something that I struggle with, and that's something that I could definitely improve upon. And mainly, most of the time, I'm probably more critical of myself than others, which some of us tend to be. But you're going to learn about your strengths and areas to grow in if you are able to receive this criticism openly and honestly. Getting feedback from teachers is essential for you to be effective as a mentor. Because if you're like, oh yeah, that didn't work, how can I change it for next time? Because I want to be a more effective mentor as time goes on. And then of course, practice what you preach. So if you are open to receiving that criticism, you're going to show and model and demonstrate how a teacher can also be open to that, to, ways in which they could improve. All right, and then lastly, have I benefited from my coaching experience? So there's a check out the statement list. It's I forget exactly which page. It's towards the end of your chapter, but there's a quick little kind of not survey thing, but do you agree with this statement? Do you not agree with the statement? Sorry, let me find it. I have it right here. Yes, on the bottom of page 138. You might want to check it out. I understand my strengths and areas for growth better. Do you strongly agree? Do you agree? Do you disagree? Or are you unsure about the statement? So that's something that's kind of like a little assessment that you can do on yourself, to hopefully be more open to, in seeing, have I gained anything from this experience, this coaching experience. And then, of course, you have to have some essential abilities to be an effective mentor. So an emotional self-awareness. What are my strengths and what are my weaknesses? And like I said before, I probably, I definitely know my weaknesses in my areas. Not to say that I could miss something. Somebody else might see that as a weakness in me, and okay, let me know. Let's figure it out. Let's see if I can improve that. Emotional self-management. Am I open to others? Do I admit my mistakes? As you know, like in this class, I've probably made several mistakes on the online formatting and this and that. So yes, I'm more than willing to admit my mistakes. Remain positive in difficult situations, which can sometimes be hard. But we want to be as positive as possible. And I think I've learned a lot more of that, just in my own sense of self over the last few years. So, things can be really difficult, but again, there's usually always a positive side. My mom, I always try to see the positive thing in everything. So I know my mom has accused me of this before. And one of the things that she's told me over the years that she said, she goes, well, Diane, not everybody can just be as positive as you. And I'm like, yeah, well, I try to see that cup half full instead of half empty all the time. But it's not to say that it's perfect or it works well, because again, we want to be humble. We're not perfect. We can learn and grow. Social awareness. Are we empathetic and aware of feelings? I've been a student too. I understand, I've been a teacher. I've been in the classroom and been that first year teacher before. I can understand and feel where you're coming from. So that social awareness that we would have, hopefully, to, within ourselves, to be empathetic and aware of other people's feelings. And then management of social situations and relationships. So are we able to advocate for others? Are we able to problem solve with others? And hopefully we are. All right, so summary of this chapter. Remember the big ideas explored. So that observing, so we have to observe, we have to understand, we have to have assessment choices and so forth. So what are we going to use? How are we going to observe? We have to reflect, make meaning of that documentation. So that interpretation, evaluation of that. We want to develop curriculum and planning. So, and we're going to apply those teaching strategies to that. So where the children are at, what does it mean? What am I going to do in the classroom? What kind of activities am I going to put out? I'm going to then apply the teaching strategies to that, and then evaluate again, looking at it going, okay, was it successful? Did it work or not? Before I go on to my next observation. Jot down your thoughts on the following, from this chapter. I learned what? I learned blank. I'm surprised by what? By blank. I want to say blank. I'm interested in learning more about blank. So that was a good little, and some of those things you could also use in of course, in our mentoring with a teacher, for, maybe at the end of each session, that they might, be able to, something like a journal or something, things along those lines, an online journal that we could implement with them. All right, so this is it for this, this chapter. Be sure to ask any questions on the general discussion board that relates to this chapter. This way everyone, of course, is going to benefit from your questions, my responses to your classmates, and so forth. So, all right, and then hopefully make sure you look at all the resources and everything associated with this chapter in the module for it. Okay, now I'm going to stop this recording, but that always takes me a few seconds. So, all right, have a good rest of your day.